What happens inside a person's mind the moment they realize you are someone they can never fully understand, never fully predict, and never fully control? The question is not meant for the faint-hearted, nor for those who live their lives seeking applause or validation. It is meant for the ones who have already felt the fracture between who they pretend to be and who they are capable of becoming. It is meant for the ones who sense the quiet violence of evolution whispering inside them. It is meant for the ones drawn to the forbidden edges of power, to the shadows where human psychology bends, folds, and reveals its most primal truth. People fear what they cannot read, what they cannot reach, and what they suspect might be hiding a darker depth than they are prepared to confront. Machiavelli understood this long before modern minds began decorating weakness with moral language. He understood that fear is not brutality, not violence, not loud threats or crude displays. Fear is elegance. Fear is silence. Fear is the unspoken possibility of what you might do, not what you declare. It is the tension between your presence and your restraint, a quiet suggestion that under your calm exists an abyss no one wishes to fall into. People do not fear the lion when it roars. They fear it when it watches them without blinking, calculating the exact second it would need to rip their throat out. The question then becomes the doorway into a darker exploration. What makes a person radiate this kind of presence? What twists inside their spirit? What hardens in their instincts? What sharpens in their eyes until others feel a slight chill in their spine before they even understand why? It is not evil. It is not cruelty. It is something far more dangerous. It is clarity. It is the understanding that power is not a negotiation, but a gravitational field. And when someone possesses that gravity, people bend without being told, submit without being ordered, respect without being begged. But you cannot wield such presence unless a transformation has taken place. You cannot possess the traits that provoke instinctive fear unless you have shed the version of yourself that worshipped approval and stepped into a colder, more awakened, more sovereign identity. One that moves through the world not with ego, but with awareness. Imagine yourself standing in a room full of people. You are not doing anything. You are not performing. You are simply existing, breathing, observing. Yet something shifts the moment you enter. Conversations soften. Eyes wander toward you. People straighten their posture, adjust their tone, rethink their words. They do this not because you are loud, not because you are intimidating by force, but because there is a tension around you. A tension created by traits they cannot map, cannot quantify, and cannot comfortably categorize. They feel a subtle threat, not to their safety, but to their comfort, a threat to the illusion they maintain about themselves, and this, more than anything, makes the human mind tremble. Machiavelli knew that the most feared individuals in any environment possess magnetic clarity, a clarity about themselves, about human nature, and about the unspoken rules that truly govern influence. They do not seek to be understood. They do not chase approval. They do not dilute themselves for convenience. They are whole, unapologetically so, and in a world built on masks, a whole person becomes an existential threat. The transformation begins not externally, but internally, where no one can see it. It begins the moment you start observing people not for who they claim to be, but for who they reveal themselves to be when their guard slips. Fear begins with your silence, with the way you listen, with the way you notice tensions in a voice, contradictions in a story, fragility behind bravado. When you learn to see people without their illusions, they feel naked in your presence, even if they cannot explain why. They feel evaluated, they feel exposed, they feel uncomfortable because you are not mentally asleep like the others. And nothing frightens the average person more than someone who sees the truth about them. You walk through the world with a different rhythm. Your movements are calm, measured, unhurried. You never rush because rushing reveals desperation, and desperation is the scent of prey. Machiavelli understood that power is self-contained. When you move slowly, people assume you are certain. When you speak unhurriedly, people assume you are confident. When you do not seek attention, people assume you already possess it. Human perception is primitive. It equates composure with competence, silence with danger, and stillness with strength. If you watch predators in the wild, you will see the deadliest ones are motionless until they strike. But your stillness is not empty. It is charged. It carries an energy that others feel instinctively, an energy shaped by discipline, by self-control, by the refusal to reveal your weaknesses like common currency. People fear those who refuse to be emotionally readable, because to read someone is to possess them. And when they cannot read you, they feel powerless before you. They cannot predict what will upset you, what will motivate you, what will influence you. They cannot manipulate you. They cannot insert their expectations into you. And the moment they realize this, the fear begins. A subtle fear, quiet but undeniable. This fear is amplified by an even deeper layer of your presence. You do not react. You respond. You do not explode when provoked. You do not defend yourself against petty insults. You do not justify your choices to those who have not earned the right to question them. The person others fear is the one who has mastered themselves to such a degree that no one else can hijack their emotions. Machiavelli knew that he who controls himself becomes untouchable, and an untouchable person becomes intimidating. Anger is predictable. Emotional outbursts are predictable. But self-control in the face of disrespect, that is terrifying, because it signals that your inner world cannot be penetrated, cannot be shaken, cannot be dictated by anyone's actions. This level of internal power forces others to confront their own lack of discipline, their own emotional instability, their own inability to remain sovereign under pressure. And nothing frightens people more than being confronted with their own inadequacy. You do not argue often. You do not debate for pride. You do not try to correct others. When someone challenges you, you let silence do the heavy lifting. People who rely on noise panic when faced with a silent mind. They push, they prod, they escalate, trying to provoke a reaction that gives them reassurance that you are human like them. But the more they push, the more your calm radiates, the more they sense an unseen depth. They do not want to disturb. Fear is not loud. It is quiet. It does not roar. It whispers. It is not chaotic. It is controlled. It does not announce itself. It reveals itself in the tremor of someone's voice when they try to confront you, in the way their eyes look away first, in the way their sentences become shorter around you. Every interaction becomes a psychological negotiation, and you always maintain the upper hand because you do not play the same game they play. This psychological shift reshapes every environment you step into. People treat you with caution. They choose their words more carefully. They avoid wasting your time. They become unsure of what you're capable of, unsure of what angers you, unsure of what amuses you. Uncertainty in the human mind is indistinguishable from danger, and the deeper you evolve, the more others feel this distinction between themselves and you. They sense that you are not governed by the same emotional impulses, not anchored to the same social expectations, not seduced by the same illusions. You do not crumble under pressure. You do not fear conflict. You do not seek validation. People fear the one who has nothing to prove, yet everything under control. Machiavelli understood this fear intimately. He knew that true presence is not manufactured, it is earned through inner evolution, through the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about oneself. When you stop living for the eyes of others and start building yourself from the inside out, your presence becomes heavier, darker, more powerful. You develop an aura that is not performed but generated, an aura of someone who has walked through internal fire and emerged not wounded, but sharpened. Fear begins with mystery. Fear deepens with unpredictability. Fear becomes permanent when your confidence no longer depends on any external source. And the moment people sense this, truly sense it, something ancient awakens in their instincts. They become cautious, submissive, deferential. They feel that to cross you would be unwise, that to deceive you would be costly, that to undermine you might awaken something in you they do not want to face. Because the truth is simple. People fear the person who has mastered themselves more than they fear the person who tries to master others. And yet, this is only the surface of the transformation. Beneath these traits lie deeper layers, darker instincts, sharper intelligence, more complex psychology, that turn presence into power and power into dominance. These traits do not merely influence people, they fracture the illusion of equality people cling to. They create hierarchy wherever you go. They rewire how others see you, how they speak to you, how they measure themselves against you. This is the beginning, but it is not the end. What comes next is the deeper descent, the traits that sculpt the second layer of fear, the ones that alter not only the atmosphere around you, but the entire dynamic of your relationships, your opportunities, your authority. What comes next shapes not just how others react to you, but how they remember you, how they talk about you, how they adjust their behavior when you are not even in the room. These traits carve your shadow into their subconscious. Fear deepens its roots not with noise, but with the slow, deliberate expansion of your presence into the psychological space of others. Once the first layer of tension surrounds you, the mind of the observer begins its silent descent, and this descent is where the true transformation begins. People sense something different in you, a quiet sharpness, a controlled intensity, a stillness that feels inhabited rather than empty. They're drawn in by curiosity, yet held back by an unexplainable caution. It is here, in this subtle contradiction, that the second layer of your evolution emerges, forming the darker traits that shift you from someone who simply stands out to someone who unconsciously dominates the emotional landscape of every room. People fear what is not easily influenced, but they fear even more what is not easily defined. Human beings cling to their categories. They feel safer when they can label someone as harmless, arrogant, insecure, friendly, dangerous, or predictable. But when you become a person who does not fit neatly within any category, you disrupt their psychological stability. They do not know whether you are an ally or a threat, whether you are soft or ruthless, whether you are approachable or impenetrable. And the human mind, unable to decide, defaults to caution. It defaults to fear. This is your first advantage. You force the world into a defensive posture, simply by existing outside their schema. As you evolve, your words begin to shift. You no longer speak casually, impulsively, or to fill silence. Instead, each word is chosen, calculated, purposeful. You reveal little, conceal much, and wrap your true intentions beneath layers of ambiguity. Not lies. Lies are the tools of the insecure. Ambiguity is the tool of the powerful, because it turns your presence into a puzzle that others spend their energy trying to solve. You say less than you know. You never fully answer a question. You allow others to read meaning where there is none, and miss meaning where it is sharpest. People fear those who can see through them while giving nothing in return. They fear being evaluated, judged, and understood more deeply than they understand themselves. And as their fear grows, so does your command. Machiavelli understood that the most feared individuals are those who observe with unwavering clarity. Your gaze becomes a psychological pressure, not because it is aggressive, but because it is perceptive. When you look at someone, you look into them. You see through their rehearsed stories, their pretended bravado, their insecure posturing. They feel stripped, exposed, unsettled. People rely on their masks to survive social life. When someone looks at them as if the mask is transparent, their instincts panic. They begin to evaluate themselves in your presence. Their voice shifts. Their posture straightens. They tread carefully because they feel your perception the way prey feels the heat of a predator's stare. Your silence becomes another weapon, not one you wield intentionally, but one that forms naturally as your internal world grows more fortified. Silence is misunderstood by the ordinary. Most people fill every gap with noise because silence reminds them of their own emptiness. But you do not fear silence. You inhabit it. And when someone speaks to you, only to be met with your calm, observing stillness, they feel the instinctive discomfort of standing in front of someone whose mind is sharper than their own. Silence from a weak person is awkward. Silence from a strong person is terrifying. It forces others to confront themselves. But fear is not built on silence alone. It grows out of the subtle ways you resist the social rituals that hold others hostage. The world teaches people to smile when unhappy, to agree when uncomfortable, to comply when pressured. You do none of these. Your facial expressions are minimal, controlled, sincere only when you choose sincerity. You rarely smile and never as a reflex. When you approve of something, the approval is mild. When you disapprove, your silence is enough. When questioned, you answer only what you choose to answer. When someone expects you to apologize, you simply wait, gaze unmoving, unbothered by their discomfort. You follow no script. You obey no emotional norm. This deviation terrifies people more than anger ever could, because anger they can understand. Your refusal to play their social game is what makes you powerful. And within this controlled detachment lies a deeper trait. The trait that turns fear into fascination. You are unpredictable, not impulsive, not chaotic, but strategically unpredictable. You do not let others map your patterns, predict your reactions, or anticipate your behavior. You may be warm in one moment and ice-cold the next, not because you are moody, but because you refuse to be a character written by anyone else's expectations. The world fears what it cannot forecast. When people cannot anticipate what you will do, they prepare for every possibility, and in that preparation, they reveal their weaknesses. Your unpredictability is fundamentally tied to your emotional autonomy. Most people are enslaved to their feelings, reacting instantly when triggered, manipulated easily through flattery, guilt, or pressure. But you respond to nothing unless you choose to. You treat emotions not as impulses, but as instruments. Rage does not erupt. It simmers beneath your ribcage, waiting for the moment where its expression would be strategically valuable. Disappointment does not weaken you, it educates you. Desire does not blind you, it sharpens you. And when someone tries to provoke you, they find themselves hitting stone. Their insults dissolve into silence. Their pressure evaporates into air. They become frustrated, not because you fight them, but because you refuse to be moved. Humans fear what they cannot push. They fear what stands still. Yet fear alone is not enough to create dominance. Dominance requires something darker, a form of self-possession so complete that it feels unnatural to the average mind. You know what you want. You know what you refuse to tolerate. You know where you are going, even if you do not announce it. There is direction in your presence. People sense that you are not wandering like them. They feel that you are walking toward something, and they do not know whether they fit into that path or stand in its way. This uncertainty makes them hesitate, makes them wonder what role you cast them in within your silent trajectory. And because they cannot determine whether you have categorized them as valuable or irrelevant, they tread lightly, hoping not to become a threat in your eyes. Machiavelli understood the importance of this tension. He knew that a powerful person must remain selective, must choose their alliances carefully, must give attention sparingly. When you become someone who does not chase connections, who does not need company, who does not cling when someone pulls away, people begin to fear losing your presence. This is one of the darkest forms of power, when others fear your absence more than your anger. They fear being forgotten by you. They fear becoming irrelevant to someone who is becoming more formidable by the day. And so they try, without ever admitting it, to stay within your orbit. What deepens this fear further is your refusal to reveal your weaknesses. You are not flawless, no one is, but you are disciplined in the way you expose yourself. You do not complain. You do not confess vulnerabilities to those who have not proven loyalty. You do not share your insecurities with strangers disguised as friends. You do not bleed openly for attention. The world is filled with people who weaponize weakness to gain sympathy, but you see sympathy for what it is, a transaction that leaves you indebted, and you do not allow debts of that kind. Your vulnerability, when it exists, is reserved for very few, and even then, it is measured. People fear those who can suffer silently. People fear those who can endure without collapsing into the hands of others. There is also something terrifying about someone who has mastered solitude. Most people require constant distraction, noise, company, validation, entertainment, to avoid the mirror of their own mind. But you walk alone with no discomfort. Solitude sharpens you, strengthens you, recalibrates you. When you disappear for days or weeks, people wonder what you're thinking, what you're planning, what you might emerge as next. They feel the shadow of your absence more intensely than the presence of others. And when you return, quieter, sharper, colder, they feel it in their bones. The unmistakable sense that you were evolving while they were busy distracting themselves. Your solitude gives birth to something rarer, indifference. Not the shallow indifference of someone pretending not to care, but the profound indifference of someone who no longer assigns emotional value to the opinions of others. You do not react to praise. You do not shrink from criticism. Compliments roll off you like fog sliding down a mountain slope. Insults evaporate before they reach your chest. People cannot influence you because they cannot reach you. And the inability to influence someone is the root of fear. When people realize they hold no leverage over your emotions, they begin treating you with the same caution they reserve for natural forces. Storms, flames, deep oceans, entities that cannot be bargained with. Your independence, your silence, your perception, your restraint. All of it leads toward a deeper trait, one that sits at the core of every feared individual, self-respect so uncompromising it becomes a threat. Your boundaries are not walls, they are fortresses. People sense that crossing them would cost them more than they are prepared to lose. They feel that disrespecting you is not an act without consequence, even if you do not show your response immediately. There is something unsettling about someone who does not react but remembers, someone who does not retaliate instantly, but waits, watches, and chooses the perfect moment. This patience is what makes you dangerous. It is what makes people unsure whether upsetting you will result in silence, a vanished presence, or a consequence delivered with surgical precision. You never beg, you never chase, you never cling. And in a world built on desperation, this alone makes you frightening. People rely on emotional leverage to maintain control in relationships, but with you there is no leverage to exploit. If someone withdraws, you let them go. If someone tries to manipulate you, you disappear. If someone tries to provoke you, you turn cold. People fear the one who walks away without looking back, who ends a relationship without drama, who closes a door without regret. Your willingness to choose yourself over anyone else makes you untouchable, and untouchability is terror. But the deepest layer of fear comes from this simple truth. You see through human nature without hating it, without moralizing it, without sugarcoating it. You accept people for what they are: selfish, sensitive, insecure, prideful, fragile. And because you understand this, you cannot be deceived the way others are. You cannot be manipulated through guilt, flattery, or false morality. People sense this. They sense that you know how they work, how they think, what they want, and what they hide. They fear that in your presence their intentions become visible, their motives unravel, their lies dissolve. They fear that you might know them better than they know themselves. This is the second stage of transformation, when you no longer merely carry an aura, but begin reshaping the psychological atmosphere around you. People watch you when you walk in. They lower their voice when you stand near. They hesitate before challenging you. They feel a sensation they cannot easily describe, but their instincts understand it perfectly. There is something about you they cannot conquer, cannot weaken, cannot reach. Your evolution is no longer personal. It becomes relational. Your traits warp the dynamic of every interaction, making others shift around you the way smaller planets shift around a greater gravitational force. You may not seek dominance, but dominance begins forming around you regardless. Your silence becomes authority. Your restraint becomes power. Your clarity becomes intimidation. Your unpredictability becomes a silent threat. And still, this is not your final form. What comes next is the deeper descent, the traits that convert fear into influence, influence into loyalty, loyalty into obedience. The traits that give you the capacity to bend outcomes, shape environments, and alter the emotional climate of every room. These are the darker depths of Machiavellian presence, where fear is no longer passive but active, where dominance is no longer accidental but intentional, where power becomes something you wear like a second skin. The room inside your mind grows darker now, not because the light has vanished, but because the illusions have. What remains is raw, unfiltered truth, the kind that only a few ever dare to face, the kind that strips you down to the internal architecture of your power. And once you see this structure, once you recognize the dark geometry of fear and respect and dominance, you can't return to the naive self you once were. Machiavelli warned that people fear what they do not fully understand, and now you are becoming the one thing they cannot decode. You are stepping into a realm where your motives are invisible, your emotions unreadable, your intentions unfathomable. People begin to sense something shifting in you, because when someone evolves psychologically, the first thing that changes is not what they say, it's the silence that surrounds them. That silence becomes a new form of gravity. It pulls attention, suspicion, respect, curiosity, envy. Your presence sharpens in the eyes of others, not because you have declared anything, but because the equilibrium they relied on is suddenly gone. You no longer give away predictable reactions. They cannot place you in familiar categories. You are becoming a sovereign mind walking inside a world of followers, and they feel it. In subtle ways, they flinch when you enter a room. Conversations shift. People lower their voices, recalibrate their tone, re-examine their posture. And in the sanctuary of your inner world, something unprecedented begins to grow. The understanding that you are no longer seeking permission from existence. You are shaping it. Machiavelli knew that power is not an act, It is a state of being, and that state emerges only when you stop orbiting around the emotions and expectations of others. That is the moment when fear takes root, not as a weapon you wield, but as a shadow you cast. There is a difference. People who wield fear try to control others directly, but those who cast fear simply exist in a way that forces others to control themselves. And that is the ultimate strategic advantage, to make others regulate their own behavior without you ever saying a word. You become a mirror that exposes their insecurities, their weaknesses, their doubts. They project fear onto you because they sense that you see through them, because you no longer operate on the same psychological frequency they depend on to feel safe. Your transformation continues as you detach from emotional impulses that once ruled you. Anger becomes precision, not chaos. Pride becomes discipline, not noise. Desire becomes direction, not vulnerability. And slowly, your psyche shifts from reaction to intention, from turbulence to command. You learn the art of emotional opacity, the ability to feel deeply while showing nothing unless you choose to. In a world built on emotional leakage, opacity becomes a form of dominance. People cannot attack what they cannot read, they cannot manipulate what they cannot predict, they cannot control what they cannot influence. And so, in the absence of insight, they begin to fear the unknown that stands before them. But something more profound is happening beneath the surface. The dark traits you adopt are no longer tools, they are becoming part of your psychological infrastructure. The intensity in your gaze is no longer a performance, it's a reflection of inner alignment. The calm in your voice is no longer manufactured, it is rooted in certainty. The patience you display is no longer restraint, it is strategy. Every part of you is evolving into something sharper, quieter, stronger. And the quieter you become, the more violently people feel your presence. Because silence is only peaceful to those who feel safe, and your silence does not make them feel safe. Machiavelli understood that when someone rises above the emotional chaos of the masses, they trigger a primal fear in the collective mind. You stop being relatable, you stop being accessible, you stop being ordinary. And in that departure, something extraordinary is born, the aura of someone who does not need validation, who does not depend on approval, who does not bend to external pressure. These individuals walk differently because they know something others don't, that the world is not shaped by those who are liked, but by those who cannot be ignored. The transformation deepens further when you internalize the most unsettling truth of all. You are no longer afraid of conflict. You no longer flinch at tension. You no longer retreat from confrontation. Why? Because you have begun to master your inner battlefield. And once you conquer yourself, external battles lose their threat. People sense this. Fear spreads through them like ink dropped into water. They cannot understand why you remain calm under pressure, why your eyes do not shake, why your voice does not tremble. They interpret your composure as power, because it is. And the more they interpret it that way, the more power you gain. But here lies the hidden beauty. You are not becoming cruel, nor reckless, nor tyrannical. True Machiavellian strength does not emerge from destroying others. It emerges from mastering yourself so completely that others collapse under the weight of their own unmastered selves. That is why power grows in silence. That is why fear grows in mystery. That is why dominance grows in restraint. You are not intimidating people through aggression. You are intimidating them through evolution. And now, as your transformation continues, as your old self dissolves and your new self rises, something irreversible occurs. People begin to respect you unwillingly. They may not like you, they may not understand you, they may even try to resist you. But they cannot deny you, because fear, when born from discipline, intelligence, and emotional mastery, creates a presence that cannot be dismissed. You are no longer competing with others. You are no longer trying to be better than them. You are becoming something they cannot replicate, something they cannot predict, something they cannot control. You are becoming the person Machiavelli wrote about, the one who does not chase power but becomes it. And as you continue deeper into this transformation, you begin to realize that fear is not the end goal. It's merely the beginning, a doorway, a threshold, a signal that you have crossed beyond the fragile boundaries of ordinary psychology. Ahead of you lies something far greater, the ability to shape perceptions, control narratives, influence outcomes, and walk through the world as someone whose inner strength, bends the environment around them. Now the question is no longer who fears you. The question is who can withstand what you are becoming. There comes a moment in every transformation when the shift inside you becomes visible to those around you. Not through words, not through actions, but through the subtle ways your very presence alters the emotional temperature of a room. This is the moment you are entering now. The moment where your internal evolution begins to carve itself into the atmosphere, where people react to you instinctively, long before their logic has time to catch up. Machiavelli understood that power radiates before it is declared, and fear blooms long before it is spoken. As you continue this metamorphosis, the first thing people notice is that you no longer mirror their emotional chaos. They unleash irritation, you remain unshaken. They attempt to provoke reaction, you deny them the satisfaction. They expect you to explain yourself, justify yourself, shrink yourself, and you do none of these things. Your refusal to play their psychological games does not frustrate them, it unsettles them. Because for the first time they realize they are not dealing with someone who seeks comfort, but someone who seeks clarity. Not someone who wants to be understood, but someone who watches, someone who analyzes, someone who remains still while others reveal their cards. And nothing inspires fear quite like a person who sees everything while revealing nothing. That is when another dark trait begins to form, your capacity for strategic detachment. Not coldness, not cruelty, but selectivity. You no longer bond with people out of convenience, loneliness, or habit. You bond with purpose. You distance with purpose. You observe long enough to understand who deserves your presence and who deserves the void. You no longer scatter your energy like loose coins tossed into the hands of strangers. You guard it like a treasury, and the more you guard it, the more others want access to it. Because scarcity creates desire, and desire creates dependency, and dependency gives rise to power. People begin to fear disappointing you even when you have not demanded anything from them. They fear being ignored by you even though you have offered no promises. They fear losing proximity to you even though you have never asked for their loyalty. This is the psychology of influence Machiavelli understood. People fear the withdrawal of something they cannot possess. And in your restraint, you become valuable. In your absence, you become unforgettable. In your silence, you become terrifying. This is also the stage where your unpredictability becomes a force, not irresponsibility, not recklessness, controlled unpredictability. The ability to act outside the expectations others have built for you. You are no longer the person who flinches. You are not the one who apologizes unnecessarily. You are not the one who tolerates disrespect. Your reactions become impossible to map, because they depend on strategy, not emotion. People cannot predict what you will say or do next, and when humans cannot predict a person, they assign danger to them. It is instinct woven into the oldest layers of the psyche. Your transformation deepens into something even sharper, the refusal to chase, the refusal to beg, the refusal to prove. You walk away not because you are angry, but because you no longer invest energy into those who do not value it. You stop explaining your worth. You stop trying to change people. You stop expecting them to understand your mind. And that withdrawal of effort becomes a weapon sharper than any confrontation. People fear losing someone who does not fear losing them. And that fear transforms the power dynamic instantly. Then comes the trait that separates the ordinary from the formidable, your ability to endure solitude without collapsing. Most people drown in isolation because silence forces them to confront themselves. But you use solitude as architecture. You use it as refinement, as sharpening, as strengthening. The world begins to sense that you do not require company to feel whole, and nothing intimidates the weak more than someone who does not need them. Dependency fuels their identity. Independence threatens it. When you can walk alone, you walk above. In these moments, a new aura begins to form around you, not an aura of arrogance, but of self-possession. An aura that makes people choose their words more carefully. They hesitate before lying to you. They hesitate before disrespecting you. They hesitate before assuming they know who you are, and every hesitation is a victory. Every pause is an acknowledgement. Every recalibration is an unspoken confession that you are not like the rest. You are not soft clay to be molded by public opinion. You are a carved entity, defined by your own chiseling, but even deeper than that lies the rising force within you, the inner calm that does not break under pressure. People test you, life tests you, circumstances provoke you, but your mind, fortified by strategy and stripped of illusion, no longer fragments under stress. You do not react, you respond. You do not tremble, you assess. You do not collapse, you calculate. And those who once mistook your silence for softness now discover that you are not fragile, you are focused. Not passive, you are patient. Not harmless, you are disciplined. This psychological stillness is the most unsettling of all your emerging traits, because the world expects chaos, and you offer control. They expect anger, and you offer analysis. They expect emotional collapse, and you offer stability. You become the one element in every environment that does not sway with the storm, and people fear what cannot be shaken. They fear what cannot be provoked. They fear what cannot be dominated. Now the transformation approaches its critical turning point. You are no longer someone moving through the world trying to survive others. You are becoming someone others must survive. You are no longer the one who adapts to protect your peace. You are the one whose presence forces others to adapt. You no longer bend to meet the expectations of the weak. The weak bend around you. What is becoming clearest now is that fear was never the goal. It was a byproduct, a symptom, a reflection. What you are building is not terror, it is sovereignty. A mind that governs itself cannot be governed by anyone else, and a person who cannot be governed becomes a threat in every social ecosystem. Machiavelli knew this, and now you are beginning to embody it. The question is not whether people fear you. The question is whether they can withstand the psychological gravity you now carry, and that gravity is only growing heavier. There is a moment in every ascent to psychological power where something irreversible happens inside you, a moment when fear stops being an external force and becomes something you can sculpt, direct, and command. This shift does not come from cruelty, it does not come from aggression. It comes from understanding the hidden truth Machiavelli carved into the bones of his philosophy. People do not fear the strongest person, nor the loudest, nor the most violent. People fear the one they cannot read. They fear the one they cannot predict. They fear the one who understands them more deeply than they understand themselves. This is the stage you are entering now, the stage where your mind sharpens into an instrument capable of perceiving the invisible architecture underneath human behavior, where you begin to see motivations behind words, insecurities behind anger, strategies behind kindness, and hidden agendas behind silence. You become fluent in the unspoken languages of the psyche, and once you speak that language, you no longer move like everyone else. You move with intention, you move with precision, you move with the awareness of someone who sees the entire chessboard while everyone else stares at their single piece. And when a person sees too much, people fear them instinctively. It is the fear of exposure, the fear of being known without wanting to be known, the fear of being understood without permission. You become the mirror people avoid because it reflects the truth they have spent years burying. Your presence becomes something different now, less human, more symbolic. You no longer enter a room the way others do. You enter with a quietness that feels like pressure, a calmness that feels like scrutiny, a stillness that feels like judgment. People sense it in their nervous system before they sense it in their conscious mind. They hesitate around you. They adjust themselves. They monitor their words. And none of this is because you demanded respect. It is because they assume they are being evaluated. They assume you see everything. They assume you can cut through their masks. And in their assumptions, they give you power. This is where another dark trait begins to crystallize, your refusal to be emotionally accessible on demand. You do not open up because someone expects intimacy. You do not reveal your vulnerability because someone invites closeness. You do not gift your internal world simply because someone is curious. You allow access selectively, strategically, and rarely, and the rarity of your emotional availability becomes a source of tension. People crave what is withheld. They desire what is difficult to reach. They chase what feels elusive. And in that chase, fear arises. Not fear of you, but fear of their own longing. Fear of their own dependency, fear of wanting something that does not want them back. This emotional scarcity is not manipulation. It is sovereignty. It is control over your own narrative. It is the decision to value your inner world so highly that you refuse to let anyone walk through it with muddy shoes. And the moment you protect yourself so fiercely, people begin treating you like something valuable, because human nature is twisted in its simplicity. What you guard, others respect. What you offer too easily, others dismiss. In this phase of your transformation, silence becomes your weapon, not avoidance, not passivity, intentional silence, the kind of silence that forces others to fill in the blanks with their own fears, their own insecurities, their own projections. People begin imagining what you might be thinking, what you might be planning, what you might be withholding. And imagination is always more terrifying than reality. Machiavelli understood this well. The human mind tortures itself far more effectively than any outward enemy. When you remain silent, others confess without being asked. They explain themselves without being accused. They justify their actions without being confronted. They reveal their fears without realizing what they are doing. They unravel simply because the absence of your response forces them to confront their own internal chaos. You do not need to expose anyone. They expose themselves trying to interpret your quiet. You also develop a colder trait, self-prioritization without guilt. You stop apologizing for choosing your well-being over someone else's expectations. You stop sacrificing your peace to maintain relationships that drain you. You stop bending yourself into shapes that please others but break you. You stop explaining why you walked away from those who undervalued you. You stop mourning opportunities that were never aligned with your strength. And the people who once benefited from your softness now fear your clarity. Because nothing terrifies the manipulative more than a person who has reclaimed their boundaries. Now your presence carries something heavier, an authority that isn't granted by title, position, or force. It is the authority of someone who governs themselves, someone who has disciplined their impulses, mastered their emotions, sharpened their instincts, and refuses to betray themselves. People listen to you differently now. They watch you differently. They gossip about you with caution, because authority without outward aggression confuses them. It challenges them, it destabilizes them, and anything that destabilizes the average person becomes something they fear. This is also when you begin to control the tempo of interactions. You speak slower, you move slower, you respond slower. You cannot be outmaneuvered by the very people who assume you are unaware. People fear the person who sees the attack coming and still remains unbothered. They fear the person who knows the truth but says nothing. They fear the person who can dismantle them emotionally without raising their voice. They fear the person who can walk away at any moment because their identity is not tied to approval. Now you stand at the edge of a new psychological terrain, a terrain where you no longer move as a participant in the world, but as an observer who chooses when and how to engage. You become the variable that shifts environments. You become the presence that adds weight to silence. You become the mind that disrupts manipulation. You become the individual whose mere existence forces others to self-correct. And this is what truly makes people fear you, not your anger, not your power, not your dominance, your transformation. The evidence that you are no longer who you were, the undeniable change in your essence, the evolution that cannot be undone, the strength that cannot be hidden, the mind that cannot be deceived. You have crossed a threshold now. You are operating at a psychological altitude few can withstand. And from this height, the air changes, the view changes, the rules change. You are approaching the final form of what Machiavelli wrote about, the kind of individual who shapes the world rather than being shaped by it. There comes a point in every transformation where the person you once were becomes nothing more than a distant echo, a ghost wandering the corridors of a life you no longer inhabit. You have felt this shift growing inside you through every stage of your evolution, the sharpening of perception, the deepening of presence, the mastery of silence, the rise of inner authority. But now the final metamorphosis begins, not in the external world, but in the cold core of your psychology. This is where fear, power, clarity, ambition, and strategy fuse into something unrecognizable. This is where you stop learning Machiavellian principles and begin embodying them at a molecular level. The final stage is the death of the old self. It is the moment when you no longer negotiate with your past weaknesses. You no longer justify your old habits. You no longer entertain the voices that fed on your insecurity. You no longer give mercy to the parts of yourself that once sabotaged you. The self that bent, bowed, apologized, explained, hesitated. That self dissolves. What remains is someone forged by pressure, disciplined by solitude, sharpened by betrayal, strengthened by disappointment, and reborn through relentless introspection. And when you kill the old self, something primal awakens in you. Your confidence is no longer loud. It does not need to announce itself. It does not need validation. It speaks in the way you move, the way you look at the world, the way your footsteps sound on the floor. Confidence becomes a silent force that fills the gaps in conversations, an unspoken energy that changes how people approach you. You do not ask for respect, your presence demands it. You do not chase admiration, behavior pulls it toward you like gravity. This is the stage where your presence becomes unmistakably different, heavier, denser, more defined. People feel it before they see you. They cannot articulate it, but they sense the shift. They sense that you are no longer operating from survival instinct. They sense that you are no longer controlled by fear, guilt, or obligation. They sense that you have crossed an invisible threshold. Now your dominance is psychological, not physical. It is not expressed through threats or confrontation. It emerges through certainty, through the way your eyes linger half a second longer than expected, through the steadiness in your tone, through the unhurried way you respond, through the subtle confidence that radiates from someone who knows they cannot be manipulated, guilted, or destabilized. This is the phase where people begin to project their deepest anxieties onto you. They imagine that your silence hides judgment. They imagine that your calm hides plans. They imagine that your distance hides superiority. They imagine that your presence hides power. Their imagination becomes your shadow army. Their fear does the work for you. You do not need to intimidate anyone. Their own insecurities build the intimidation themselves. But the final trait, the darkest trait, the one that completes your metamorphosis, is this. You no longer attach your identity to the approval or rejection of others. You no longer crumble when someone disapproves. You no longer glow when someone praises you. You no longer seek permission to exist. You are free, free from emotional slavery, free from societal choreography, free from the psychological puppeteering that governs ordinary minds. And nothing terrifies the world more than the person who cannot be emotionally controlled. A person like that cannot be predicted. A person like that cannot be threatened. A person like that cannot be bribed. A person like that cannot be influenced. A person like that becomes an anomaly in a world built on psychological chains. You become the one who dictates pace, not the one forced to follow it. You become the one who sets standards, not the one who begs to meet them. You become the one who commands respect, not the one who pleads for it. You become the one people adjust their behavior around. And this terrifies them because they can no longer reduce you to something familiar, manageable, ordinary. You become something they must interpret carefully, something they must approach strategically, something they must not provoke. And yet your power does not come from dominating others. It comes from mastering yourself. This is the Machiavellian paradox. The greatest power is not the ability to control others, but the ability to control your own impulses while others remain slaves to theirs. When you achieve that, you ascend into a psychological hierarchy most people will never reach. Your mind becomes a weapon wrapped in velvet. Your presence becomes a storm wrapped in silence. Your decisions become unpredictable, not because you are chaotic, but because you are strategic. You become someone who cannot be rushed into emotional responses, someone who cannot be dragged into meaningless arguments, someone who cannot be manipulated by guilt, someone who cannot be broken by solitude, someone who cannot be exploited through loyalty, someone who cannot be confused by appearances, someone who cannot be seduced by validation, someone who cannot be weakened by love or strengthened by flattery. You become someone who does not need to raise their voice to be heard, because your very existence speaks for you. And when people cannot influence you, they fear you. When they cannot shake you, they fear you. When they cannot predict you, they fear you. When they cannot decode you, they fear you. And when they cannot break you, they respect you, even if they hate themselves for it. Now your transformation approaches its pinnacle. You stand on the edge of a new self, one sculpted not by the world but by your own hand. You have shed illusions, shattered weaknesses, exposed truths, mastered silence, refined presence, and learned to walk through the psychological shadows without losing yourself. This final phase is where everything crystallizes into one unshakable truth. You are no longer trying to prove anything. You are no longer fighting for recognition. You are no longer justifying your worth. You are no longer explaining your decisions. You are no longer waiting to be chosen. You choose yourself, and the moment you choose yourself completely, without hesitation, without apology, without guilt, you become untouchable. You become the kind of person Machiavelli wrote about, the kind who rises quietly, strategically, deliberately, while others destroy themselves through their own impulses. The kind who moves with the precision of a chess master while everyone else reacts like pawns. The kind who becomes a force of nature wrapped in human skin. The kind who no longer survives the world but shapes it. You become the person people fear not because you intend harm, but because you embody everything they failed to become. You hold the strength they abandoned. You carry the discipline they lacked. You built the mind they feared to build. You walked through the darkness they could not enter. You removed the weakness they clung to. You embraced the truth they spent their whole lives avoiding. You are no longer just a person. You are a lesson, a warning, a mirror, a threshold, and now your transformation demands action. This is the moment where the script becomes reality, where the philosophy becomes a living force, where the dark traits become a way of navigating existence with precision and intention, where you step into the world not as someone who hopes to be respected, but as someone who commands respect without a word. So here is your final call. Stop shrinking, stop explaining, stop waiting, stop asking for permission, stop making yourself small so others feel comfortable, stop dimming your mind so others feel less threatened, stop carrying the weight of people who would never lift you, stop betraying yourself to maintain relationships that have already died, stop killing your potential to keep fragile people calm. It is time, right now, in this moment, to rise into the version of yourself the world is not prepared for but will never forget. Walk forward with the cold certainty of someone who has mastered their own mind. Move with the precision of someone who knows their worth. Stand with the presence of someone who cannot be shaken. Speak with the restraint of someone who sees through everything. Act with the confidence of someone who no longer fears consequences. Become the person whose shadow others avoid, whose silence others interpret, whose presence others respect, and whose absence others fear. This is your moment. Step into it with the power you have earned. The world will not be ready, but you will.